Hello, everybody. Welcome. This is the first of a series of 3 events that we're doing on AudioCraft, audio storytelling, in partnership with Tisch's undergrad TV and film and Jocelyn Gonzalez here. She and I cooked this up for your pleasure, and we are so excited to have Chloe Prasinos here with us tonight. Chloe is an audio storyteller whose work has consistently pushed the boundaries of genre, format, and form. She isn't just a producer or director, she is an artist who is constantly redefining what narrative audio can be. Her Wondery series, Operator, is a great example. It's a documentary that uses the tools of audio fiction and theater, theatrical performance, rich sound design, scene-driven storytelling to illuminate a true story. Chloe builds worlds. She does this in all of her work by blending genre and form in ways that challenge our expectations. This boundary-pushing spirit runs through her entire body of work, from the intimacy and edginess of Love and Radio to the bombastic cinematic ambition of Marvel's Wolverine series to the poetic complexity of his Saturn Returns. Chloe creates audio that doesn't just inform, it moves, unsettles, and transforms. Her work has earned accolades, not just because it follows trends, but because it sets them. At Gimlet's Reply All, Chloe worked on one of my favorite multi-part series, On the Inside, an investigative journey culminating in a prison interview scene that is crackling with tension at the level you might associate more with Clarice Starling meeting Hannibal Lecter in Silence of the Lambs. But whether she is working in journalism or immersive narrative, Chloe is always operating in an electric space where truth and creativity meet. She's a thoughtful mentor and educator, helping shape the next wave of audio makers. Please join me in welcoming someone whose work is as daring as it is resonant, the extraordinary Chloe Prasinos.
What an intro. Thank you. I like the slip of tongue, eliminate a true story or illuminate, because I think that is a question for us to think about tonight. Hi, my name's Chloe, as Ellen said. Because we're in a kind of university setting, I wanted to just kind of spend a moment kind of contextualizing my career and the path it's followed so far. Because when I was a student, I found that really useful. So I've had really good timing. I got my foot in the door in a newsroom at NPR's All Things Considered as an intern right before season 1 of Serial came out in 2014. And then I kind of rode the podcast wave, moved into long-form stories, reporting for Love and Radio, 99% Invisible. Worked at Reply All, as Ellen mentioned, making like I don't know, was it weekly, bi-weekly? I don't really know. Long-form show at a startup. Then people were like, audio dramas. And we got curious about that, and I worked on the first 2 seasons of Marvel Comics' first ever serialized audio drama. And then, of course, everyone was like, we need the next serial. What's it going to be? And so I moved into telling very long stories across many episodes. And then we're going to hear a clip from the show tonight, but I co-founded a show at the Pineapple Street Studios called The 11th, which for a moment, a beautiful, brief moment, was a home for experimentation and for work that didn't quite fit into your typical podcast format or broadcast format for that matter. And then the money went away, which maybe you've heard about. It's kind of rough out here in the podcast industry and the world. And so I'm noticing, maybe you are too, that as the industry constricts, the remaining resources are kind of funneled towards the sure bets, the safe and cheap investments as people with power see them, and they seem to think that that's celebrity chat shows, true crime, and scam stories. I will say, though, that something that kind of brings me some reassurance is that there is experimental work still that I feel is able to break through the noise because it's experimental. And for me, the work that feels most alive is the work that borrows techniques from audio drama and memoir, from reporting and poetry and cinema alike. And so holding that, we all need to eat and pay rent. My hope is that simultaneously, like, this moment of constriction is going to lead folks and is currently leading people to kind of innovate and to make what they want to make versus what their bosses tell them they need to make. And so tonight, my hope is that we're going to study some work that blends genre to understand its narrative and sonic mechanics, so that we can apply what we learn to our own work. So first, we're going to talk about sound and how we can use it as a tool. And then I want to break down how I made a based on a true story piece specifically. And then I want to talk about why to blend nonfiction, like reporting and audio drama. I don't think we always should be doing that, but I think there are moments where it's useful. And I have a running list of reasons that I think justify these techniques that I'll share with you at the end. And then maybe we can add to it if you have ideas as well. So that's the plan. Yeah, all right. So let's talk about sound. Sound is a powerful tool. And yet so many podcasts, at least in my experience, treat sound as incidental, like as a kind of cheaper way to pilot ideas for TV shows or documentaries, set up a mic, call it a day. So easy to make podcasts, right? But we're here to talk about how we can embrace the medium that we work in to treat sound as instrumental versus incidental. And so what are some of the ways we can use to go beyond a voice talking into a microphone? And so one of the things I think sound design is so effective for is that it can gesture towards memory that maybe was never recorded, couldn't have been recorded. So I want to listen to a clip briefly, but some setup first. So this is the first 2 minutes of a story called Time Machine: The Score. It opens a 2-part series that the team at the 11th, we structured as a concept album. It collages essays, interviews, observations into 8 tracks, which is really like 8 pieces, on 2 sides, all meditating on the Fugees' album, The Score, and what it meant to writer Hanif Abdurraqib as he was coming of age. So to start, these first 2 minutes of the story drop you down into the moment in Hanif's life when he first encountered the album. So it's the summer of 1996, and Hanif is 12 years old and living in Columbus, Ohio. One note, it's better in headphones, obviously, but try to listen to the sounds in the background as you listen.
Track 1, On Bicycles. In my neighborhood, the bike was a type of passport. The bike was a show of power. The bike was a mode of freedom and a tool for romance. There are endless stories of first cars, of teenagers who sped off into the night to defy whatever flimsy curfews were set for them. There are far fewer stories about the freedom of the first bike, and I am talking the real bike, with gears and tall wheels. The summer of 1996 was the best summer to have a bike. I was 12, on the verge of 13, on the verge of 8th grade, which meant some level of superiority. It felt like the summer where everyone was growing into a sort of funhouse mirror of pre-adulthood. The person they dreamed themselves to be, finally coming to life a bit through a lone, scraggly facial hair, or a voice cracking itself into depth. The core of my crew consisted of Josh, Kenny, Mario, and Brandon. Josh lived one house down from me, in a pink crib with siding that was immaculately cared for. Kenny lived around the block. Mario and Brandon, 2 brothers, lived about 5 houses down in an older, bluer spot. Our plans were often the same. We'd meet somewhere, on our bikes, and then take to the neighborhood. We'd pass the girls we'd liked, but never hung out with all that much. We'd see the older kids, the ones we wanted to be like one day, out washing their cars, and we'd annoy them for a bit until they'd shoot us away.
So in the opening of this piece, you hear kids yelling, you hear bike gears turning, wheels kind of whirring as the writing kind of transports us back in time, back into memory. This maybe is a generalization, but I think it's pretty safe to say that like listeners don't think we're playing actual tape from Hanif's childhood. Though if you listen in headphones, you can hear a kid going, "Hey Hanif, get your bike," you know. It's a sketch, you know, it adds color, it adds detail, it evokes a memory without needing to be literally true. It's an accurate representation, but it's figurative, not literal. And perhaps this is obvious, but I'm trying to make a point, which is that films use this technique all the time, you know, reenactments of events that happened in the past that are reenacted in order to enhance the viewer's understanding of what happened, often imbued with like a kind of specific feeling or emotion that the filmmaker is trying to emphasize. But the viewer doesn't think it's real, you know. So the question I'm asking myself when I'm making this kind of work is like, okay, form, content. So we're making a concept album about the Fugees and Hanif's relationship to this album. The form is a concept album, experimental, memoir, content. I think the content can play with sound and memory, and that's going to be something that's going to be, you know, digestible to the listener without needing to explain it. So this begs the question for me, like, what is true in sound? Some producers who identify as more like capital J journalists than I do can't get down with this. So for an example, I made a series, I don't even know when, I guess 2023, called Ghost Story. And during development for this series, that was a documentary, I suggested, you know, it's called Ghost Story. We need some spooky sound design, right? I need some creaking doors. I need a squeaky stair. I need some wind blowing, so maybe like, you know, what are those things called? Shutters, like banging against the house in the wind. All light touch, very classy. You know, I'm not trying to go like hokey here. But I wanted to help like bring the listener into the scene and kind of evoke like what does a haunting kind of sound like outside of, you know, the very important work that music can do. And my friend and colleague who worked for a long time at the New York Times didn't feel comfortable with that. She wanted to record any sound effects that we used in the series at the haunted house in London. Those to her would be like true sound effects. And so we went to the house in London where the murder at the center of the story happened, and the whole house had been renovated and was completely silent. So no door creaks, no stairs sighing, no wind. Well, I mean, I guess there was wind, but, and so we relied on great music and on great writing. But so the form there is a documentary led by capital J journalists. Content, everything is literally true, right? So as we discuss blended genre this evening, I want you to ask yourself, like, where do I land on this? Where do I land as a maker? And then kind of separately, like, what does the story that I'm thinking about applying these techniques to want? Like, how might blending genres serve the story and the kind of truth that I'm trying to communicate? Because we're all going to land in different places on this, and what you're making, I hope, will inform the creative choices that you make for that specific project. Okay, so sound is an editorial tool, not just sound effects. That's my heading for this section. Okay, so I want to play a clip from a piece that's going to sound like shit in here, but sounds great in headphones. This piece shows for me that when it serves a story, we can play with the listener a little bit and temporarily obscure the truth with sound on purpose for narrative effect. So this piece is called Jack and Ellen from Love and Radio. At this point, it's kind of canon for me. It's a non-narrated documentary made in 2013 by Muj Zaidi, and it was produced and designed by Brendan Baker. Shout out, Brendan. This piece inspired me to make audio documentaries, which is why whenever I teach, I play it. Maybe it'll inspire you. It uses very innovative sound design to kind of like twist and complicate the story, and I think it's such a good demonstration of sound as a tool editorially. Content warning. There's going to be more content warnings tonight. So this is a piece about sex offenders and child abuse. There's nothing graphic in what we're about to hear. Pedophiles mentioned. So the clip is going to last 5 minutes. If that's not for you, feel free to, leave the room. No problem. Let's play the clip.
At the time, I was working at Subway, but it was just really, tedious to work as a sandwich artist. I was working 5 days a week, really hard all day. I was on my feet for 8 hours, just breaking my back. I wasn't able to make my own times. And the best part about this job is that I can make my own hours. I can work from bed. I can make as much money as I want. I was really stupid about the whole thing initially because people would want to meet me right away. They would say, hey, you're 15. That's cool, let's get a coffee. So I decided to come up with a story. I decided to go on Craigslist. I posted an ad in the male for male section of Craigslist titled Young and Cute. Craigslist wouldn't allow me to write my age without getting my entry flagged within a minute. I actually used an alias. It was like naming a baby, I wanted to get it right. It was Jack. Hi, my name's Jack. I'm a young guy who is still in the closet and would love to make some gay friends because I've never had any. I'll be moving to New York soon, so write me an email, don't be shy.
That was the story.
Yes, I was going to make some friends ahead of time, which allowed me to talk to these people without the expectation of having to meet them face to face.
I made a fake email account to go along with that ad.
And then I included a picture
of my friend, my roommate.
I'm really young looking and skinny, what gay men refer to as a twink.
Pedophiles love twinks. After 10 minutes of posting the ad, I had about 50 messages.
I don't really check my emails anymore because I have so many of them.
But I quickly realized I wouldn't be able to acquire the kind of information that I needed.
But you seem really interesting, and I like you more than anyone else I've spoken to.
So I had to convince them to add me on Facebook.
So here's my Facebook if you want to continue chatting.
I could find out their occupation, family, friends, stuff that people put on Facebook without thinking twice about it. Personal information. As soon as they would message me on Facebook, I would reply,
hey, I didn't mean to deceive you, but I'm not really 18, I'm 15. If that's okay with you, let's keep talking.
just to rule out the ones that genuinely believe the kid was 18.
That's okay. I don't mind. Age is just a number.
And then they would add me on Facebook and we would go from there. The first pedophile that I ever spoke to just began talking about how he was horny, how he was looking at Jack's pictures, thinking about how much he wanted to. I had never had any experience talking dirty to men because I was a 21-year-old woman who had only been with women and has only still been with women. Let me rephrase that. So I took screenshots of the messages that he sent. I took screenshots of all of his friends. He had a lot of family members listed. So I took screenshots of their profiles and I included them in the thread letter that I had written. And if you want, I can read one of the many thread letters.
Hello, Mr.
So-and-so.
I have recently been speaking to a 15-year-old boy named Jack. I have saved documentation of all of your conversations.
Pretty much made it obvious that Jack didn't exist, that I had explicit content. The ultimatum was, if you don't give me this $500 and sign this card, come tomorrow morning, I will send all of this information out to your family and friends. You have until tomorrow morning to send me the gift card. I've had 4 aliases: Jack, Lisa, Caleb, and Ashley. I've made about 30 to 40 grand from 100 people, maybe more. My name is Ellen, and I'm a professional blackmailer.
Quite the cold open, right? So much to learn from that. Specifically, I want to talk about sound as a kind of editorial tool there, which really go back and listen in headphones because that was hard. But so I think sound is something to learn from that is the way that sound is doing true narrative work here, you know, and the way that we can tolerate a fair amount of confusion as listeners, as long as there's like a narrative through line that feels like we can kind of relax and trust these storytellers that they're taking us somewhere and that the choices they're making are intentional and deliberate. So, you know, there's this braided voice distortion that at first, at least for me, I'm not sure if I'm hearing from 2 people or 1, which, you know, it's a pretty cool move that they did there. And it's a slow reveal, right? Which for me, at least mirrors how Ellen lures her victims in. Also, I feel that the voice distortion establishes that this is an unreliable narrator. That's kind of implicitly happening. Also, the going back and forth between point of view is also helping kind of go back and forth between like the text of the ad or the text of the baiting and the narrator who is telling us about this pedo baiting, and then separately also the kind of voices mixed usually pretty far back of the people responding to the ads. So they're like this spatialization of the audio is telling us and communicating pretty clearly who's who. And so like I'm not confused, you know? Which I think is pretty special, given how much is going on there. I also think that the voice distortion summons an image that's kind of in the zeitgeist, which is like the anonymized person backlit talking to a documentary crew, right? So sound as image is at play here, and I would argue always. And then the music, right? Like a storytelling to a beat. Oh my God, I love it so much. But I also think there's not just the beat kind of pulling us forward, which definitely has that kind of narrative propulsion, but there's also like a dissonance between the content and the music. Like, why am I partying to pedo baiting? Like, this feels weird, but it's kind of like luring you in, right? Just the way that she does. So I think there's a lot of form reflecting content happening in the storytelling, and that's the kind of thing I want us thinking about when we're thinking about blending genre, because while this is not exactly an example of blended genre, what I'm trying overall to evoke and apparently inspire for the future generations of audio makers is that we don't have to have such kind of narrow parameters for like what is journalism and what is audio drama. I think that sound can be playful and a narrative tool, even if, you know, we're just making good journalism. I think, what else do I have to say about that? That's about it. I think we can tolerate, just as an aside, about 5 minutes of confusion, which is right when the reveal lands here. So it's a fun goal to play with, maybe in your own work. All right, so now that's all kind of, these examples so far have been sound design housed inside a documentary. But what about creating a fictional story to better tell a true story? An audio drama based on reporting. My note says reported reporting. It's good. So specifically based on a true story, storytelling, which again, you know, not to state the obvious, but novels and films, they live in this territory. You know, this is the based on a true story model is just like, you know, available to them in a way that I feel the kind of way this industry has grown, for whatever reason, we're kind of a bit more segmented and a bit more siloed. And I'm curious about what kind of place this storytelling has in our work, this blended genre. And I think it's inevitably going to challenge the industry-wide attachment I diagnosed to literalism, and this like illusion of objectivity, which obviously, guys, journalism's so important. Never now more than ever before. But well, I'm not really talking about that. I'm talking about how blended genre can allow us as makers, not telling the news, to draw on the tools of both audio drama and documentary to better get at the truth. So that's always the goal. So I want to talk about a case study, one where we, created not just evocative sound design, but where we summoned like a whole world to drop the listener into. We created an ecosystem. Okay, so the project. I was approached in 2018 to work on a documentary about the rise and fall of a phone sex empire in the 90s. Fun. So in the job interview, my first question was like, so do you have tapes of the phone sex? And they're like, no. And I was like, I don't know if I want to listen to 8 episodes about the rise and fall of a phone sex empire and not hear any phone sex. And I could immediately, just through these kind of job interview conversations, see the story slanting towards the people who were much easier to access and who wanted to tell this story, the kind of white men at the top of this phone sex empire, like the charismatic founder who, had run-ins with the law, and the geek whiz kid who built all the tech. And I knew I didn't want to work on a series where they were the focus, even though we had such good access to them. And immediately was talking about how we could bring the perspective of like the actual laborers. At the peak of this company, American Telnet employed like 600 operators, and there was a ton of turnover. So there's just like so many people doing sex work for this company. And how could the documentary create space to like really spend time in that aspect of the business, like the product that they were selling? And so my pitch before I had the job was to break format similar to Atlanta season 1, where we would create a bottle episode with a composite character, and we would drop. Sorry, I should explain what that means. So we did a lot of reporting, but could never find like the perfect former sex worker who had been there for the right amount of time or had enough interesting things to say, or like all the things that you're doing when you're casting a documentary. We had like a bunch of good reporting, but not that one sparkly character. And so I was like, I think we should, the host was a former sex worker herself, and I was like, I think that we could make a composite character and we can drop listeners onto the floor of the call center that they had been hearing about for the first 3 episodes of this documentary series, but to do it from the sex worker's perspective and to very clearly explain to the listener and situating them in what we were doing and why we were doing it. And because maybe it's film people who hired me, they said yes. But I think this is a good example of finding an opportunity in what would have otherwise been a major deficit in the story. And the solution and the opportunity was blending genre to do what movies and novels do all the time. So we made a based on a true story episode that sat squarely in the middle of this 8-episode arc. So we're about to hear a clip, a little bit of setup. It was co-written by me and the host, Tina Horn, designed by Brendan Baker. Shout out, Brendan. There's a host intro that precedes the piece that kind of bridges the listener from the documentary into the audio drama and explains what we're up to and sets up both how what they're about to hear references the first 3 episodes and the reporting that we had presented and kind of advances the series as well. But what I'm going to play is the last 7 minutes of the piece, and then we're going to talk about the kind of questions that me and the team asked ourselves when figuring out kind of how to approach this. But a little bit more setup. So we've, so far in the piece, we've heard the host intro. We're now in the audio drama world. We've heard our main character, whose name is Lena, in different situations interacting with her manager, with her coworkers, and obviously with customers. We hear her kind of code switching, like sliding between roles based on customers or based on who she's talking to in the office. 1 minute she's dominating a customer anally, and then shifting into kind of a more like softer emotional tone when the customer becomes self-conscious. So kind of showing like the swing and the like emotional labor aspect of the job that we had, knew about and learned about in our reporting. There's also an abusive caller, which is something we learned about in our reporting, and that's referenced in the clip you're about to hear. We're not going to hear it. And then sprinkled throughout are lots of direct references to the documentary and details we learned during our reporting that I'll point out once we've listened. So it's the end of the day, and this is Lena's last call, the kind of denouement of the piece. And then we're going to hear her shift out of the phone universe. She has two names, kind of the name she uses with callers and the name she uses in her life. And that's it.
Positive call wins. 900.
Hello? Hello, who is this?
Oh, hi there. I'm Ruby. I'd love to get to know
Cut the
you.
crap. What's your real name?
Oh, Ruby's my real name. How are you feeling today? I'd love to help you relax.
What? No. My husband, he
Oh.
called this number. Did he talk to you?
Ma'am, I actually do have a number if you want to talk to customer service.
I don't want to talk to customer service. I want to talk to the slut my husband's been jerking off to. Do you know how many hundreds of dollars he's been
I'm
spending
sure
on
it's
that?
a lot, ma'am. I'm so sorry, but the manager told me that I need to hang up now, so...
You have a manager?
Yeah.
I don't... How does this work?
Okay, so if there's nothing else you need from me, I'm gonna
Wait,
go now.
wait, wait. So this is your job?
Yes, it's my job.
To talk to strange men?
Yeah, it's kind of like a date, you know, but a little bit more to the point.
I just want... I just want to know what he wanted to talk about.
Oh, your husband?
He ended things he hadn't told me
Well,
about.
ma'am, I don't know. That's not really how this works. I don't know who talked to him, and even if it was me, I probably wouldn't remember. I have so many calls.
What do other guys want to hear?
Oh, all kinds of stuff.
Like what?
Well, some of them just want someone to talk to. Like, you know, about like life stuff, you know. Some of them like talking to girls about, you know, sex. Like maybe they're into something that they don't know how to bring into their sex life, so they want to talk about that.
Ugh. They just want you to describe knocking him in the butt or something.
I wish.
What? What do you mean by
We're not allowed to say that. We have to say like lollipops or whatever.
He paid to talk about lollipops. That is not sexy.
But what if I talk about the melting, dripping sugar and how my lips wrap around the stiffness? How much I love that fruity taste bursting in my mouth as I stick it deeper
Okay.
and deeper.
Okay, I get it.
Listen, I didn't know men could be like this until I started here, so I gotta hand it to you. He's lucky.
If he's calling these lines, then he doesn't feel lucky.
Listen, most guys who call, they just want to talk about their girlfriends or wives or whatever. They don't want to cheat or break up, so they talk to us. I mean, plenty of people have a fantasy that they don't know how to ask for.
You think he's ever asked me what I want?
And I'm not saying don't be upset. I'm just saying this doesn't mean he's not happy with you.
Well, maybe you're right. Well, but our love life could be better for me, too. And I didn't run up a $200 bill.
Well, then maybe you should tell him what you want.
Yeah, I want my money back.
Cool. Have a good day.
Hey, don't forget to pick up your check on the way out.
Thanks, but I never forget to.
Listen, Justine has another family emergency. Can you come in for the graveyard on Saturday?
Yeah, I can do that.
Thanks.
Okay, I gotta go. I'm just giving me a ride and I think she's waiting outside.
Okay.
See you tomorrow.
Thank you.
Bye.
Hey, Lena, how's it going?
Hey. Listen, could you call me Ruby? I'm just worried I'm gonna slip and say my real name to one of these guys.
Yeah, I get that.
Shit. Do you have a lighter? Here. Thanks.
How's it going?
right? God, I hate feeling stranded.
And the bus sucks.
I swear I haven't been on time once since my car broke down. Monica's been cool about it, but that'll only last so long.
Me and my man are gonna go see that dinosaur movie tomorrow. You wanna come with? I'll come pick you up. Seen it twice. It scared the shit out of me.
Yeah, that sounds fun. What time?
I think we're on 8. I'll let you know.
Yeah, okay, cool. Is he still giving you shit about this job?
Yes. Does a dick have to be so good?
Listen, I'll tell you what I said to the last guy I dumped. I said, either pay my bills and buy birthday presents for my mother or shut the fuck up.
And did he?
Hell no, that's why I haven't had sex in a month. I'm practically a virgin again.
Ready? Yeah.
Thanks again for the ride.
Yeah, no problem.
I made decent money today, so hopefully I can pay my bill and get my car out soon.
Check it though. I just heard about a job in this office across town. If I get it, maybe I can get you in.
Okay, so what's the work?
You know, boring, like filing paperwork and shit, but at least a real job.
I mean, this is a real job. Like, we get benefits.
Yeah, but I gotta get out.
Since when are you so high and mighty? We were just there together like 2 minutes ago.
Yeah, but I don't want to do this forever. And I'm worried I'll never see men the same way again.
Yeah, but wouldn't you rather, like, know what they can really be like so you can find a good one?
I already got a good one. And if we were to get married and I catch him calling one of these lines, then I mutilate him.
Jesus, it's just talking.
Okay, but would you really say that if it was your man? To me, it most definitely be cheating. I can tell you that.
Whatever you say.
Anyway, you do you. I, for one, am getting the fuck out of here.
Lucky you.
Door's open.
Thanks.
Okay, some sexy content. I want to talk a little bit more about the kind of direct references to the documentary that are embedded in there. But first, I want to maybe talk about process. So, you know, before this was made, before we had booked the studio and cast the actors, and you know, before I directed their performances to be funny, not hokey, you know, just all that. First, we have to figure out how we want to approach this. And so, okay, what are we doing? We're making an audio drama based on a true story. So the questions I'm asking myself at the beginning are, how will it sound? What do we want the listener to feel? And if situated inside a documentary, how will the piece enhance what came before in the documentary and set up what's coming? So aesthetics, what will it sound like? Pretty quickly we're like, it's going to be a realism kind of aesthetic. Like, it's a documentary, it would be kind of strange it should be grounded. We don't need like Marvel vibes. Okay, then what's the mission? Like, what's the agenda? We want to capture a day in the life. So what does that mean? All right, well, I know I want to center the voice of the operator, and so that means I'm going to stay in her POV, like throughout the script. I also want to capture, like, my second agenda item is I want to capture the sheer variety of sex work that we learned about in our reporting. So the kink, the emotional labor, the boredom, the excitement, unfortunately, the violence and abuse, all the isms, you know, racism, misogyny, classism, all those. I also want to hear many different callers, because this is also our chance to imagine American Telnet's customers who made them like millions and millions of dollars. And then I want to hear, can't do that. I want to hear the operator interact, not just with callers and customers, but also with peers and with her boss to kind of explore those power dynamics. And one way to get to know a character better is to see them interact with different kinds of people and see how they behave. All right, so if that's my mission, what are my ingredients? One ingredient, I definitely am going to want some montages. I want variety, and I want elapsed time, because this is a day in the life. And so we wrote a ton of interstitial scenes, very small moments that don't quite have a beginning, middle, end, but feel like a conversation that you could kind of overhear and drop into, and you would immediately know like who these people are. And so in writing these, interstitial scenes that would become part of montages, you need one in the bunch to kind of have an exit point, like a big laugh or like a natural pause or some kind of feeling of completion. We also need enough info to immediately have a clear sense of like who these people are and what they want. So these interstitial scenes need to kind of get right to the point. How to get those? I mean, improv. Improv's good. We did a lot of that in the studio with the actors. Kind of throwing prompts their way and then like playing with them to find what felt good and real. And then we also wrote a bunch of wild lines, just like single lines that I knew would be fun to kind of like float in and out of a montage. So, and that would help support the edit and give me a feeling of a variety of characters. Okay, so one ingredient, montage. Number 2, direct references to the documentary. So I knew I wanted the story to take us inside the phone universe and kind of travel around the phone menu that we had heard this like whiz kid guy in previous episodes explain how he like innovated the tech. And honestly, it is cool. Like we take for granted the way we like call health insurance and press 1 for this, but he kind of like, that didn't always exist, and partly it's built because of phone sex. At the very beginning of that clip, you heard back in the mix a voice saying a number and then like 900 busty co-eds. So that is a reference that only the sex worker is hearing, that the listener would be recognizing. That was a back-end system that the company designed to tell the sex worker what kind of call they were about to have, and if it was an 800 call or a 900 call. One was HBO and one was CBS, and so they knew what, based on FCC regulations, they could say, like lollipop versus blowjob. Also, something that is a direct reference to the doc was the different attitudes about sex work between sex workers. So the kind of subtle hypocrisy in Lena's friend's perspective at the end, the way that Lena doesn't think that sex work is wrong, etc. Also, we heard about angry wives calling in with questions about their bills. Aliases, the Ruby-Lena tension is something that came up in our reporting, and the manager character, who you hear only briefly in this clip, but who plays a larger part in the overall episode, is based on a main character in the documentary who's with you for all 8 episodes. Okay, and then third ingredient, most important ingredient when we haven't yet made the thing, but we're thinking about how to do it, is we need grounded scenes where something happens. I want a variety of premises of scenes that our reporters heard about time and time again that will both give us an opportunity to see the central character in a variety of circumstances and to get a sense of the caller's experience implied through the convos we hear. Because again, the customer experience was another missing perspective from the documentary. Okay, so this brings me to my overall question. What are the reasons why we can and should blend genre? Maybe sometimes we shouldn't. For me, at least, sometimes a story comes into sharper focus when you blur the line between fact and fiction, but you have to earn it. And so the way I've started to think about this for myself is it has to have a fundamental truth that needs to be either heightened or obscured or expanded. So for me, these are the 3 things that I've come up with about what kinds of stories might merit this treatment, and you let me know what you think. Okay, so one category of story that would merit blended genre for me is a personal truth. Memoir, autofiction, or like a fictionalized version of a personal story, kind of one step beyond, names and voices were changed to protect people's identities, like anything in that kind of territory. And the ways that can employ the techniques of audio drama, flashbacks with reenactments, flash forwards, imagining the future, dream sequences, internal world building, and the monologues that happen in a character's mind, kind of creating contradictions like in Jack and Ellen that make us wonder if the narrator is reliable. breaking the fourth wall, speaking directly to the listener. These are kind of the techniques that a personal story can employ to blend genre. Examples that come to mind for me are the shadows, appearances. Have you heard George's podcast? Lots of, for me, seminal texts. Okay, second category is societal truth. So using our power and privilege as media makers to create a form that protects the anonymity of sources while still offering them the opportunity to speak about their experience in the world. So, palatable for the industry at large example of this would be hiring an actor to obscure someone's identity. What we just heard would be like a slightly heavier lift example of kind of using storytelling and blended genre to shine a light on a societal truth. I think a good example of this from back in the day is Issa Rae's series Fruit. So yeah, check that out if you haven't heard it, if it still exists on the internet. Okay, third would be a lost truth. So events that were not recorded but have been heavily researched or lived or embodied. So this would be reenactment that sounds like archival, reenactment that sounds like scenes, a play that humanizes and personalizes a real event. So a really good example of this would be, have you heard George's podcast, A Grenfell Story? I also think to some extent it happens in Empire City. So yeah, this is my list. Let me know if you have other types of stories that you think would merit blended genre, because I think we're making this up as we go a little bit. That's all. I'd love to take some questions.
Hi. Yeah.
Hi.
So I'm wondering, because I'm in the audio master's program right now, and we're dealing a lot with like making sound effects versus finding them online, and with what you talked about was sort of like what is truth in audio. And I'm curious, like, as somebody who also believes that it's okay to sort of like fudge some of this stuff, how do you keep audience trust and like differentiate what's real and what's more figurative in an episode without sort of like taking people out of it?
Yeah, totally. I think that that's such a good craft question, and I'd love to talk about it at length because I think it's kind of the hardest part. But my feeling is that the contract with the listener is a kind of sacred and holy thing, and that it should be treated with the utmost respect. And so this is where the kind of like form content question comes to mind for me. So like, if we're telling you that you're about to listen to a concept album that's based on memories from this like well-known memoirist and poet, like I don't think they really need to know that, we recorded with some kids in Oakland on bikes and had them say, "Hey, Hanif," But when the contract with the listener with operator is like you're listening to a documentary, there's a very like closely written host intro that kind of manages that contract with the listener and clearly explains and justifies why we're moving from documentary into audio drama. And I think it really depends on the project, how that transition is handled and how soft or how kind of direct it needs to be. But I would just err on the side of respect, if that makes sense. And to just kind of in a this is perhaps kind of ridiculous to say, but in like a post-fact world, I think it needs to be treated pretty carefully. But I don't know. It is, the other thing I'll say about this is I made a personal piece that included like archival tape from my family, and then in a separate scene that was writing, I sound designed a sequence and included some voices similar to like the Hey Hanif that you hear in the background. And Julie Shapiro, who was editing it, thought that it was archival tape because it was in a piece that was really rich with archival tape. And we actually made the call to pull that design back, to have the design be a little bit more just like bumps and doors and kind of fluorescent lights versus like dialogue that was kind of back in the mix, because it felt like the contract with the listener there was that like the tape you're hearing is real. And so I think you can play too with the kind of fader on detail, like how detailed is the design, and how much might you imply that it's real tape. Yeah.
Hey. So the last clip that you played with the sex workers, that was one episode in a series, right?
Yeah.
And everything else was more
Yes.
classic documentary.
Yeah.
So how did you navigate partway through the series being like, okay guys, we're gonna do something different for just one episode.
Yeah.
And then we'll be back to what you were listening to before.
Yeah. Great question. I mean, to be honest, I haven't listened to the host intro in about 5 years. But what I recall is that, so this is positioned 4 out of 8 in the series, so right in the middle. And we tell the listener from episode 1 that we're gonna do this later. Partly because a question I have in my mind, episode 1 of a phone sex documentary is, where's the phone sex? At least I have that question. So we're kind of both addressing a listener expectation early on and promising it later. Also, I think, I don't know, this series was acquired by Wondery and they made a lot of changes after I stopped working on the series, but caveat. I think it also functioned for them as like a teaser, it is hard to manage and to pull a listener's attention across 8 episodes. So if we're promising you some phone sex in episode 4, it's a pretty good reason to keep listening, I think, for some people. Yeah, and then the host speaks directly to the listener and explains what's about to happen and why we're doing it, and sets up how the details of the world we had been building using reporting and documentary were living as well in this audio drama. Any other questions?
Hi. In your process of creating a composite character from interviews that you've done with, it sounds like quite a few folks, I'm wondering about what you took from, or what your relationship was to those original interviews in conceptualizing this one. Were there any verbatim actual moments of text that you lifted? Were there any other sort of textures or attitudes or voice sort of cadences or anything like that? Or were you more culling just the themes and then writing from a more neutral place?
Yeah, so I was the story editor on this series, so I didn't do any of the interviews, and I listened to them, and we didn't, to my recollection, do any direct pulls of text to dialogue, with the exception of the phone menu that you're hearing throughout. There's many moments where you're kind of in the phone universe, and that is scripted from American Telnet and not altered, as well as those whisper messages. But again, I think that's another example of how, who gets to tell, who writes history. Of course we have that text in a way that we kind of had trouble finding sex workers who had worked for this company, or former sex workers. And then, to be honest, I'm just I'm really feel-based. I just am okay, what would both be true and funny? What would feel true and emotional? What is narrative work that we can only do in this episode that we can't do elsewhere? That's gonna be how I'm making calls in terms of priority. And so I remember I listened to the interviews that the reporters had gotten, and I then months passed or something, and I was just make me a list of the kinds of calls you heard about all the time. What were the ones that came up over and over again? And, again, feel-based, there weren't a ton of calls from angry wives, but as soon as I hear that, I'm oh, that's good. I think that's useful. And also, we can't have all of these calls be porn. So I think that'll be effective for variety. And what else? Yeah, and then I think a lot of the work happens in directing the actors, and like there's the writing, and then you're in the studio, and I often view that process as like I hold the script with a kind of light touch, except for moments that I know are like important transitions or kind of like fulcrums in the story, and trying to kind of do like discovering things about the character and kind of building the character with the actors together. So like I knew, for example, from the reporting that we wanted Lena talking to colleagues to sound different than Lena on the phones. And it's subtle, but like if you listen, you can kind of hear that code switching. And so like there were things I knew that were gonna be happening in the performance that wouldn't quite be happening on the page that we had heard about in our reporting.
I wanted to note, and I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who listened to it, but The Good Whale does this in the last episode,
definitely.
which was such a wonderful surprise for the New York Times in particular.
I know, and I think a good sign.
Yeah, agreed. I do come from a journalism background, so I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about like the directing of the actors. I think this is so interesting, and I had so many questions like, how long were you in this studio? Did you have all of them together? Was it one person? And also like, more about the riffing. Like, unless they're like improv people, I do find people are not great.
Not their
Obviously,
favorite.
actors are better, but
Yeah.
and just I would love to know, out of the riffing, did you actually use any of that?
Oh my God, definitely.
Okay.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so the question is about directing actors. Okay. So I'm an improviser. I think that helps. I also have a dance degree and studied choreography in college, so I'm pretty at home in like a collaborative environment where we're kind of building something together. And I learned a lot directing famous actors I had no business instructing for Marvel Comics. That was, so I'm kind of carrying all of that into the studio. But that being said, obviously like time is money, studio time is money. You kind of do have to plan your days to move at a certain clip. And so I'm always advocating to build the time for improvisation. And when we're recording like the scenes where I know we need to hit a certain amount of beats, I'm like tuned to how quickly we're arriving at something that feels, again, like it honors this aesthetic choice we had made of realism. And if I can get to that pretty quickly, then I can create a lot of room for and time for improvisation. Not all actors love improv, which is why we've got, wild lines and little interstitial scenes written. But I think there's like some real discovery that happens in the room. When I make audio drama, especially in the day of like age of Zoom and remote recording, I will basically never allow a recording to happen where actors are not recording synchronously. I just think it's ridiculous and stupid. Like how could anybody, you could be the best actor in the world, and I just don't, if you're gonna do a phone sex scene and you don't have someone to play off of, like, what are we doing here? That's a line that I will always hold, with the exception of like, the person voicing the phone sex menu, we don't need them to be there with the operator. So it definitely is like a production puzzle, and editorial decisions are being either prioritized or deprioritized based on your production framework. Protecting improv, making sure actors are playing together versus in isolation. And was that everything that you asked about? What else? Yeah? Okay. I'm like, do I have anything else to say about this? I think like this is just like a fun thing, but I do think it's useful to have like a few props. like a purse. We had her go through her purse. We had some chips that she opened. I don't know, like little things that you can like bring into what is otherwise a pretty sterile kind of clinical space of a recording studio to make it feel a little bit more real. This is what I wanted to say. 2 more things. One, the woman who plays the main character is a really fabulous actor who had basically no acting experience when I cast her, but she had a podcast. And I listened to it because her tape was really good. Her audition tape was really good. And then I went and listened to the podcast, and I was like, she can do this. Like, I don't know. I really believe in kind of taking a chance on people. And then the second happy coincidence is that the person who we cast as the abusive caller was a former phone sex worker himself from back in the 90s. So I don't know, I tend to take little kind of happy accidents like that as like a sign that things are going well. But I felt like there were a lot of kind of things that fell into place in making this so that were like very supportive of the thing we were trying to do. You know, the actor playing the phone sex worker like took this role really seriously because it was a big thing for her. And then this guy kind of brought this like lived experience into the room, especially for the call that I think was like the kind of riskiest call in terms of like intimacy direction and like the safety of the actors on set. Yeah.
Hi. With the Jack and Ellen Love and Radio piece, I'm just sort of curious to hear more about this like piece of audio that inspired you to make audio yourself. Like, do you remember where you were when you first heard it? What was going through your head? How did it impact you?
That's such a nice question. Wow. Well, the year was 2013. And I had graduated with a dance degree and an English degree, and therefore had no income opportunities. And was thinking about like, how will what's a job I won't hate that will have me out in the world talking to people, which turns out we don't do that much. Wish we did more. I just recall, I think because of my kind of art background, I've always gravitated towards work like Love and Radio, where like rhythm and music is like deeply a part of the storytelling. And I think I was probably I was probably living in France, where I was an au pair for a family. I had just graduated from college and was like, well, I can't do a job that's normal. I'm gonna go be an au pair. And I think I heard it and just was like, this like resonates with me, and feels like a useful way to spend one's time, and a job I maybe wouldn't hate. And so I applied for the SALT Institute while living in this French family's shed in their garden. And then waitressed at home in Connecticut for like 4 months to be able to pay for it. And the rest is herstory. Yeah. Thanks for asking. But you should check it out. It's Love and Radio's stuff is like kind of the amount of links that were dead for me to find that story today were kind of alarming. I don't know about the paywall situation, but the one that worked was on Spotify. So go listen to the rest of the piece there. Thank you, everybody.
Let me just make sure everybody knows we have an event here on Wednesday. Dan Taberski and Diane Hodson are going to come next week. And then the following week, it's the 29th, Gisele Rigatau and Sandra Lopez Monsalve are going to be here. So we hope you'll come back and join us. Thanks so much.